Hello there, and welcome to Gatekeep Productions. I'm Crowgraves Cocon. Let's get into the video. So, I know that I said before that I was not going to do YouTube videos anymore. However, I've decided that occasionally, when there's a major event that takes place in the news, if it's worthy of comment, I will do a one-time video on that topic and then leave it at that, right? So, you'll probably see more of me at some point in the future. But for now, the channel other than this is, this is it, right? So make the most of it. So for the sake of this video, right, we're not going to go through all the ins and outs of the conflict at the moment because so many channels have done that. Instead, we're going to look at it from a different angle, and this is to do with how to converse with people from the different sides. So if you like the sound of that, then don't forget, obviously, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell button so you're notified, and also don't forget to check out our many other videos on this topic. I promise you will not be disappointed. We've done an entire History of Israel series where we've gone through all of the history of this from both sides. And also as well, what's in particular pertinent to this video is we've done a video which looked at why different people support Israel and why different people support Palestine. So I think that's really key with understanding the different perspectives with regard to all this. So the main thing to understand with all this is that the reason why people have such strong opinions on this, right? The vast majority of you here will have never gone to Israel or never have gone to Palestine. And yet, all around the world, people have very, very strong opinions on it. People have been marching, people have been protesting, even though they have no connection to the land, even though they have very limited understanding about it from either perspective. However, the reason why people have such strong opinions is to do with identity, whether this is religious, whether this is ethnic, or whether this is even political. So we're going to explore some of this, right, throughout the course of this video. But how we're going to do that is by asking three very simple questions, and this will help us to understand the other side rather than just debating with them. Because I've done a lot of growing up in this past year, and what I've come to the conclusion of is there's no point in debating with people about things. It's much better to listen and therefore to understand. So when you're speaking to people about this, treat it almost like it's an interview where you're kind of getting to the crux of why they think that. Try not to interrupt, try not to put your own opinion, let them explain their position, and then afterwards you can say, well, I think blah, 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 blah. And also as well, I really strongly recommend don't argue with people on social media. Even just asking these kind of questions to people, I've already been blocked by certain people just by asking these questions. So I would highly recommend not speaking to people on social media about this. Speak with close friends and close family about this, people who you trust, people who you have more of a bond with, because then people are much more likely to actually understand that you're not coming from a place of bad faith and vice versa. So without further ado, we're going to dive into these three questions now. But actually, before we even do that, I just have to say a little disclaimer, which is, in my opinion, I think that the present conflict here is not going to be resolved. Now, that's a bit of a bummer for certain people who think that, there might be peace and people sing Kumbaya at some point. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen. The reason it's probably not going to happen with regard to Israel and Gaza is because it's very, very, very deeply entrenched. So in 1948, you had the so-called Nakba. So this is the expulsion of many Palestinian Arabs from the land which is now Israel. Now, if you look at the West Bank, about a third of its population are the descendants of those who were expelled during the Nakba. However, when you look at Gaza, the figure is 80%. So 80% of the population of Gaza is the descendants of people who were expelled from Israel. So these are people who still hold the keys to their ancestral homeland, and these people here, no matter what, are never going to support a two-state solution. This is part of the reason why Hamas is so strong in Gaza as opposed to in West Bank, because these people have a vested interest in not only just ending occupation, which they see as step one, but actually want to go further than that and actually reverse the existence of the state of Israel, right? They want to undo the state of Israel. They want to, at bare minimum, have the Palestinians be in control of that land. The Jews can either stay or the Jews can flee to other countries, etc., etc. But this is the opinion of the majority of Palestinians that, yes, end occupation, that's step one. Step two is regaining all the historical land of Palestine from the river to the sea. That is the end goal. So Israel, knowing this and understanding this, has looked at the events of October 7th and had looked at multiple other events which has taken place in the last few decades. And they understand that actually, as bad as it is, they kind of, regardless of international law, regardless of whether they want to, they have to occupy Palestine. It sounds really horrible to say, but just in blunt strategic terms, they have to. Now, for those who don't know the geography of Israel, about 50% of the total territory of Israel is made up of the Beersheba sub-district. This is basically where the Negev desert is. This is in the south of the country. Hardly anyone lives here. The vast majority of the Israeli population is along the so-called Israeli coastal plain. This is where 57% of Israel's total population lives, and this is where about 70% of Israeli Jews live. So this is Israel's heartland, and at its narrowest point, it's just 15 kilometers from West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea. So they're fully aware that if you had a similar attack as you had on October 7th, from not just Gaza, but from the West Bank, this would cut Israel in two. This would be a huge risk to their heartland, and therefore they cannot do anything except continue the occupation, because for strategic reasons, they cannot trust Palestine actually being a fully sovereign and independent country, because if Hamas, with a fraction of the resources and manpower that a united Palestinian state would have, if they were able to do what they did on October 7th, if you had a fully independent Palestine, they would be able to do even more than that. And Israel will never allow that to happen to them. So as bad as it is, the occupation is still going to continue. And actually, I think it's going to be even worse. I think there's going to be basically a reversal of what happened in 2005. So for those who don't know, in 2005, Israel withdrew all the troops from Gaza and it withdrew 8,000 settlers. I think that what's going to happen after this war is that Israel is going to reoccupy Gaza, and the settlers are going to come back, and they're going to come back in even greater numbers, and the Palestinian population will be restricted just to their major population centers, but the Israeli settlers, they will be moved into all the other places. So that's my prediction of how this current conflict is going to end, and it's not very nice at all. Regardless of what perspective you have, whether you're pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian, it's not an ideal situation I think everyone could agree with. However, now we've got that to the side, we're going to be talking about the three questions. So the first question that you ask people is, what do you think and why do you think it? Now, the importance of this question is because it individualizes the response. So it's very easy to think, right, this is the Israeli perspective and this is the Palestinian perspective. But each individual person throughout the world who has an opinion on this, no two people are going to have the exact same opinion on what they think or why they think it. So this helps you to break down those barriers and to actually make it so that you're talking person to person rather than this is one side versus the other side. This also applies to other things with politics, right? Whether you're left wing or right wing, etc., etc. If you speak to people about politics from an individual perspective, you're going to get an individualized response. And that's very empowering to the person, and is actually something which will actually relax them a lot more and make it so that they feel that they're safe and that they can have this kind of open dialogue with you. So that's the first thing. And then the second question that you ask people, this ties in more with the Socratic method. So Socrates, he was an ancient Greek philosopher, and what he would do, which would really bug people, is he would continually ask people questions, and eventually people would end up saying, I don't know. Because if you ask people enough, you will eventually get to the point of, I don't know. Now, the less knowledge that they have about said thing, the less confident that they are in their own ideas, the sooner you're going to arrive at that I don't know. There are some people, why they think this, they'll just say, I don't know, because they're ignorant about the facts from either side, and that's just that. However, when you keep asking people, eventually you will get to realize that about 90% of people, it's not worth even having a debate with this, on this issue about, right? Most people do not know the facts, they don't know the figures, they don't know the history. And so you come in with facts and figures and history and stuff is not going to persuade them. It's actually probably going to make them angrier because they're going to think, damn it, this person knows what they're talking about. This is from either perspective, by the way. I have people on the Israeli side who don't know what they're talking about. I have people on the Palestinian side who don't know what they're talking about, right? So most people, when you ask these sort of questions, you will figure out very quickly whether it's worth even having a continued dialogue with them about it. So the second question that you ask people is the question of, can you see how the other side might have a point? Now, this question here is really important because it helps you to determine who is a fanatic and who is actually more reasonable. Because a fanatic is incapable of seeing things from someone else's perspective. They're only able to see things from their own perspective and their own identity. And so therefore, this kind of weeds out people who it's worth having a further conversation with, because they at some point in theory might change or at least be open to it. And the people who are like, no, the other side has no like good opinions at all. My side is completely right, their side is completely wrong, etc. So this will reveal to you who is fanatical, who is completely ignorant, who it's not even worth having a further conversation with. Ask these questions, find out, and then just leave it at that, right? And the third question you're going to ask people is this. If the roles were reversed, so for instance, if it was, say, the 1967 war gone the other way, let's say, for argument's sake, that Palestine was occupying Israel, and Israel was the one who was, fighting against this occupation. So on the news at the moment, if you're imagining, instead of Palestinian kids being blown up and stuff, instead, if you imagine it's Israeli kids, instead, if you imagine it's Israeli refugees fleeing from this place, etc., etc. So the reason why you ask this question of, would your stance change if the roles were reversed, this will get to the root of whether someone's support for this is conditional or unconditional. So for those people who the support is conditional, these people will tend to be more secular, and it will tend to be more along the lines of left and right. So this is where someone's identity is not necessarily baked in as much stone, and where in theory at least they might be able to change their perspective on it depending on the circumstances on the ground. Now for the people who it's unconditional, these are people who their identity is a bit stronger. These are people who, for ethnic reasons or for religious reasons, they have a shared stake within this, and therefore it's very unlikely that you're going to get very much out of those people, right? So if someone is Muslim, if someone is Jewish, if someone is Arab, if someone is ethnically Jewish, if someone is a devout Christian, etc., etc., their views on this are very unlikely to change, and their views on this, no matter what happens on the ground, is not going to change. So regardless of what Israel does or what Palestine does, etc., etc., it's not going to change the fact that these people think this, and that it's so intrinsically tied up with their own sense of identity that you're not really going to get much budging from this. So you flip in the scenario whereby the Palestinians are the ones occupying the Israelis and vice versa, it's not going to affect them at all, because these people are going to still back with the side that they're backing regardless. Now, on the other side, the people who are more conditional, this is where you tend to get more of a left-right divide. So for people on the left, right, when you speak to them, and actually most people kind of in society, their stance on this is actually baked in a left-leaning like perspective on this, regardless of whether they themselves identify as leftists or not. And this is because on the left, you have the idea of social justice rather than the idea of justice, which has its root in the Torah, which has its root in the Bible, which has its root in all the Abrahamic religions, including Islam. So within the Abrahamic religions, you have the view of justice. This is where you as an individual, what you do matters. God is going to judge you not because of what you as part of a group does, but based on your own actions, right? So regardless of whether you're rich or poor, black and white, etc., what you do matters. So regardless of whether you're oppressed, regardless of whether you're the oppressor or not, how you conduct yourself, that's how you as an individual will be judged. That's how, if anything, that's how your side will be judged, right? The righteousness of a cause will be based on how the individuals on each side of that cause actually conduct themselves. However, when you look at the left-wing perspective, this is tied up with social justice. So this is the idea which has its roots in a Marxian dialectic. So the idea of this is that you have the oppressed and the oppressors. So whether this is, the bourgeois, the proletariat, men, women, homosexual versus heteronormative, etc., etc., whatever the different dynamic is, right? The view is that the oppressed, no matter what they do, no matter how benign or benevolent they are automatically on the side of evil. And those who are oppressed, they are automatically on the side of good. No matter how heinous their crimes are, no matter what they do as individuals, anything can be justified because they are the oppressed, and therefore they are fighting against the oppressors, and therefore, their actions are excused within that lens. So this is part of the reason why people end up supporting one side or the other, because it's deeply rooted within this. So for them, if you ask the question of would your opinion shift if the roles were reversed, these people will say, yeah, of course. Like for them, they don't even understand the root of that question, because they're like, well, duh, obviously, yeah. If the Palestinians are the ones with all the power, and they are oppressing the Israelis, of course we're going to support the Israelis over the Palestinians, because the Palestinians in that case, they are the oppressors, and the Israelis in this case would be the oppressed. However, it kind of is very different for people with a right-leaning perspective. So we're not talking here about the religious right, we're talking here about the kind of more secular right? We're talking about classical liberals. So for myself, I am a classical liberal. So for me, support for Israel-Palestine is dependent on which side is the most liberal, and therefore it is still conditional. So in the event of the Palestinian side being more liberal and the Israeli side becoming more illiberal, there is the potential to then switch one's stance on this and to actually then support the Palestinians. So if the Palestinians were the liberal side and the Israelis were the illiberal side, then the support would shift. So when we look at this, we can see how Gaza and how the West Bank has governed itself. That is not a liberal democracy by any stretch of the imagination. However, Israel is the only liberal democracy within the Middle East, and actually the vast majority of Israelis support there being a liberal democracy there. So actually you can see from the polls here that 62% of Israeli Jews want there to be a liberal democracy. However, 24% of them want there to be halakhic law ruled in Israel. So halakhic law, this is the law set down by the Torah, and these are the people who support there being this imposed on Israel. So instead of there being a democracy, whatever it says in the Torah, that is what you abide by. So there's only 24% of the population which supports this. However, among the Haredi Jews, this is the ultra-Orthodox Jews, 89% of them support halakhic law. And amongst the Dati, these people here are the Orthodox Jews, and amongst them, 65% of them support the imposition of halakhic law over democratic liberal law. So it's very true that the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox have very high birth rates, and therefore in time you might have a demographic shift whereby the majority of Israeli population is actually Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, and therefore the support for a democratic state ends up shifting away from a democratic state and towards having the imposition of halakhic law. So in this case here, people would then, if you're a liberal, would then stop supporting Israel. However, what I would say is that even if that was the case, I would then stop supporting Israel, but there's almost nothing which would endear me to support Palestine. Now, the reason I say this is because if you look at the history of the Jews and the Palestinians, there's actually quite a lot of overlap. Both sides have been exiled, they've been occupied, they've been humiliated, they've been persecuted, and actually there has been a large degree of ethnic cleansing. Regardless of whether one wants to admit it or not, there has been a great deal of ethnic cleansing. For one group, a little bit more, let's just say, but certainly for the other group, you could also argue that definitely. And there's always the fear that there could be more ethnic cleansing for both sides. However, what I would say is in terms of on an ethical basis, how the Jews have conducted themselves after 2,000 years of being in exile compared to how the Palestinians have survived after 75 years, it does not even pale in comparison. In 2,000 years of pogroms, of expulsions, of the Holocaust, etc., you will never find an example of Jews coming out of the ghetto, coming out of the shtetl, coming out of even the concentration camp, and committing the kind of heinous crimes which we have seen with Palestinian cause. I'm not saying all Palestinians, but I'm saying the Palestinian cause, and many people there end up supporting the people who do these acts. You will never find people going and massacring innocents. You will never find people targeting school buses and blowing themselves up. You will never find suicide bombing. You will never find people taking hostage, nothing, right? You will never find an example which is similar to this. And actually, I would argue throughout the examples of those people who are oppressed and people who have been the victims of settler colonialism, wherever that has been, whether you look at the Irish, whether you look at the Algerians, whether you look at the Maori, whether you look at the Aborigines, the American Indians, the South Africans, no matter where you look, you will not find an example of the victims of settler colonialism resisting in this manner. Yes, those who are the victims of it have every right to resist. And I myself, if I was a Palestinian, would resist Israeli occupation 100%. However, there is nothing that would make me commit the kind of heinous crimes which many people on the Palestinian side have committed against the Israelis, and they started just 75 years. And actually, their conduct in the last 100 years, because as we covered in our previous videos, this conflict here between the Jews and the Arabs, this actually started by the Arabs, right? If you look back at 1920, this is where the conflict actually begins. And this is at a point where the Jews are so much in the minority, there's hardly any immigration at all. So you can't even say that, oh, well, they're taking over land, etc., etc. You can see how, right from the beginning, there was a distrust and there was a hatred towards these people. So there's nothing in the last 100 years which would endear me to supporting Palestine. I might stop supporting Israel, and actually I really am very skeptical and very critical of what Netanyahu and the religious right within Israel are doing. I don't think that how they've conducted this war in any way has been helpful to Israel. I think it has really hurt the cause of Israel because of how they conducted it and how they've purposely been, targeting civilians as much as they say that are not. They've not taken the proper care to actually minimize civilian losses in this conflict. But even still, there's nothing then that would make me go, yes, I am in support of Palestine. I think there should be a two-state solution. And actually the borders of that, I think that you could make a very strong argument that borders of Palestine should be even greater. If both sides could actually lay down their arms and actually, support the other side and actually say, right, okay, these are the borders, we're not shifting it past this point. Yeah, cool. Of course, you could have Palestine be much larger than it currently is. You could have Israel be much smaller than it currently is. But you cannot have a two-state solution if one side does not respect the existence of the other. And actually, as I've said, the majority of Palestinians ending occupation is step one. Step two is trying to destroy the state of Israel and to reclaim that land. So I think with that being the case, there is no negotiation. And unfortunately, because there's no negotiation, whether we like it or not, and I certainly don't like it, the occupation is a logical conclusion that comes out of that, because Israel has no choice but to do that. Regardless of whatever we think of that, regardless of whether the UN wants to sanction Israel, regardless of whether even Europe and like the United States want to sanction Israel, Israel is going to continue doing this because it has no choice other than to do this. So, with all that being said, like I said, don't forget obviously hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell button so you stay notified. And like I said, I don't know the next time I'm going to do one of these videos, but I'd be very interested to know your opinion on this. But in the comment section, I would ask that you answer the 3 questions which I've outlined here, because then we'll have more of a dialogue rather than a debate. I'm not here to have a debate with people. I don't really care. Like, if you put nonsense in the chat, I'm not going to respond to it, or I'll just respond in a very good like, okay. So if you actually want to have a dialogue with me, then please answer the questions in the way that I've laid out in this video. And in the meantime, have a great day and bye.